What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and I am sitting here in the Homebrewed Christianity podcast studio in Redondo Beach, California, next to Nathan.
Yes, that's it sounds very official.
Oh, I know.
When you have like the name of a place like that.
Yeah.
So we need to get like signs made.
We should.
About on the outside of the door.
This is the Theology Nerd microphone, where nerdy things happen. So today on the podcast is a live podcast. Woo! It was recorded at Third Window Brewery out in Santa Barbara.
It's the first time I've been there. It's beautiful.
With our friend Tim,
What's up, Tim?
elder of the hops, and he's starting a new faith community there called the Way Collective. And this was a part of
launching it.
We went to the Third Window. We did a live podcast. And then since then, there's been a group of them that have been reading, and I don't know why they would do this to themselves, Pete Rollins' book.
Yeah. They were giving them away there.
Yeah.
They couldn't sell them.
Well,
They had to give them away.
They couldn't. Yeah. But now, so if you're in Santa Barbara area, you should definitely connect with him. But the other thing you can do is you can go when Pete's going to be there. So Pete is going to be in Santa Barbara. I guess they'll have just read the book, and most of them, I don't know how many are finishing it. But, they at least showed up for a book discussion group for the free book they got. But they're going to show up for Pints and Parables.
On May 26th.
That's a great day to do it.
Yeah. 6:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. at Soho in Santa Barbara. You know where Soho is?
I only know because you know.
It's right across the street from probably the best breakfast place in Santa Barbara.
Tupelo Junction. So I know that most of you are not going to be in Santa Barbara anytime soon, but when you go there, there's a place called Tupelo Junction, and it has the world's greatest breakfast.
It's delicious. It really is.
Good. It is so good.
You hyped it up pretty hard, and it did not disappoint.
I know. It is the bomb diggity. There's so many options there that I don't know. Like, it's just hard to make a decision, not because you're like, I guess I can eat that. I've tried so many things there, and they're all yummy.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, Tupelo Junction is not sponsoring the podcast. I am open to it.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
But if you were like, okay, I want to go to Santa Barbara, but it's a little daisy trip.
Yeah.
Then you should go to Tupelo Junction
for breakfast, hang out. There's some beautiful things to see.
Oh yeah.
And then go listen to some Pints and Parables with Pete.
Yeah.
On 26th of May.
26th of May. Well, so this is from Third Window Brewing Company. They have a really sweet place.
Oh, speaking of delicious food, that Frito pie.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Santa Barbara is great. They had a Frito pie at this place that does smoked meat right before the podcast.
Amazing. That was a sweet spot.
Yeah. So, yeah, I hope you enjoy it. And remember, Theology Nerds, to come back here next week. There's going to be more goodies headed your way. And if for some reason you aren't connected with us on the interwebs, you should do it. You can go to homebrewedchristianity.com. You want to get on the email list. That way you get updates about all the different stuff, like live events come to your area, when new books in the Homebrewed series come out. Giveaways. We got one going on right now. All kinds of stuff. The other thing is you can make sure you find us on Facebook. And I'm going to guess that you type the word Homebrewed and then Christianity in, and
voila.
Boom.
The magic of the internet.
Yeah. But secretly, my favorite is Twitter. I don't know.
I don't think that's a secret.
I love Twitter. It's and listen, I mentioned it a couple episodes ago. Now I've had a few more people tweet me and say, is it true that you just complain about basketball games on here during basketball? Because I like NBA. I don't really want to watch you tweet about deep things. I only want to complain about politics on the internet or basketball. And I said, I got plenty of basketball tweets. At Trip Fuller, there you go. Nathan does not tweet about basketball.
That is correct. I do.
Everyone has growing.
We need to do like a crossover, like ESPN podcast, basketball theology nerd sort of thing.
Just to explain the rules to you?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, this is a bar.
You know, I wonder, I don't know how many people, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who are really into sports, but I always feel bad for that one guy on NPR who does all of the sport. He's like the one
sports guy?
Yeah, for NPR. His job is basically to explain what sports are to people who listen to NPR.
They're like,
so we might need to do something like that for the podcast. Just, I don't know.
At halftime, do they play classical music or jazz? At halftime of the game?
Actually, both at the same time.
Both
overlaps.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Well, I was also going to tell everybody that if you're a member of the Homebrewed community group, then next week I'm going to email everybody about our first epic reads for the summer. So
excellent.
That means you'll get an article, you'll get a PDF of the article, and then we'll have a time when I'll get on and hang out. I'll say stuff about it, then we'll talk about it, and then we'll just have ourselves a nerdy old time.
That's right. There will be beer.
Well, yeah,
drinking. So you guys drink together as a communal activity.
It's a digital communal experience, and one of the times this summer we have to do it with our Australian friends.
Yep.
We have ask him, like, if he has to be there.
He's got a new baby coming.
I know.
So maybe we should.
That's a good reason.
We should do it sooner rather than later.
Well, you know, like,
although with the new baby, maybe he'll be up at a normal time for us.
That's what I'm saying. Like, babies, you can't predict them junks. They do whatever they want. And this, like, for example, I got crapped on twice yesterday, and little baby Haven, just, you know, you change a diaper, you think it's all good, and then what? Nope. Psych! And then he comes flying out the back top of that diaper. His clothes are soaked. And you're just like, why you gotta do this to your dad? I thought we had an understanding. I just cleaned you. And he looks at you with his eyes and just like, which is, I think, baby talk for, why are you talking to me? I got poop in my pants. Yeah.
This conversation took a weird turn.
Well,
I'm very glad.
Well, now we're going to take a turn to Santa Barbara. The Third Window Brewing Company, where we had a live podcast.
The Believing Skepticast.
Yeah. Prepare yourselves.
What is up, everybody? How you doing? Good? Okay, judging from the noise, maybe just okay. But welcome, nonetheless. Again, my name's Tim. I am curating this collective called the Way Collective, and we are a new movement here in Santa Barbara that is planted out of a community that has had a long history since the 1880s, actually, of serving this city. And so we are just out on the town trying to have a little bit of fun, have a little bit of brew, and talk a little bit about faith and doubt in the 21st century. So welcome to the Believing Skepticast. We are going to talk about the new normal for the 21st century, which is not necessarily that believers and atheists are out in the general public debating one another in different schools of thought, but rather that the believer and the skeptic reside within the same person. And how do we navigate the waters of religion in the 21st century, let alone our personal journeys of faith and doubt? And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And if you are interested in following up with us, we will be beginning an 8-week reading group of this book, which is called Insurrection, by an author named Peter Rollins, who will be with us in about 2 months doing another one of these events. So he'll be coming up to do an event called Pints and Parables. He's sort of this Irish philosopher and theologian who gets up there and orates. Some of us are really good at math, and he's really good at storytelling. So you'll not want to miss that. I'm not one of the math people. I don't know about your personal thing, but yeah. So if you are interested, we'll be here at Third Window every Thursday night around 8:00, and the first 12 people to want to do that get a free book. So if you're interested, come talk to me. Come say hi during the break or after the podcast, and I'd love to give you more info on that. And yeah, we are going to be journeying into that, doing a few more events with the goal of beginning to do gatherings this fall. So the whole movement of everything that we are up to here is to create a community that is embodying a new way of being in the world. And it's one that's focused on productive and proactive things like connection and contemplation and critical thinking and creativity and compassion. And so there's too much of our world, especially the world of religion, that causes more division and pushes people further and further away. And so we want to inhabit a different space and talk about what it means to live those practices together in the way of Jesus. So thanks for coming. Now it's my pleasure to introduce a good friend of mine whose name is Tripp Fuller. He is the host of a podcast called Homebrewed Christianity, which talks about all kinds of fun philosophical and theological things, but with the goal of helping you brew your own faith. So Tripp is a podcaster. He's also an educator, a theologian, and a dad, and a good friend, and somebody who has helped me in my theological journey as well. So could we give him just a warm welcome to Santa Barbara tonight? All right. Yeah.
All right. So today we're going to talk about believing skeptics. And the first time I got skeptical was in fourth grade. I don't know how many people have been to fourth grade. Congratulations. How many people grew up in the South? Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. How many people were Baptist preachers' kids in the South? Oh, yeah. How many people are back-to-back sword drill champs at Vacation Bible School? Oh, we got 3 sword drill champs in his house. You may be saying to yourself, am I drinking in a room full of people that are sword drill champs? Don't worry. The sword is the Bible, sword of the Lord. That's right. In the South, if you're a Bible-believing Baptist preacher's kid, nothing says piety and the love of your enemies in Jesus like competitive use of Scripture. So you shame people into memorizing more. Because I don't know about you, but there's a strong correspondence between people I know that quote Bible verses and their care of their neighbor. Like when I think of people that are like, that's right, Jesus said love your enemies. I do that all the time. One way, by quoting Bible verses at them. I'm still processing with my therapist, overcoming being a Southern Baptist minister's kid in the South, but nonetheless. So I was in fourth grade, and then you just got to out-Bible people because really your religion, your nation, and everything are one giant bucket of fun, and it's obviously a bucket of fried chicken. I tried to elevate, take sword drill champ to a new level. Where you and it's literally a competition. Like those, the game show network where they have game shows and you're like, who would have made a game show out of Yahtzee? Well, I guess they needed to fill time. Sword drill's kind of like that. You have little kids memorize Bible verses and then they're like, how fast can they find it in the Bible? And then can they memorize it? And then their parents are like, praise God, fried fish. We're eating fried fish, coleslaw. And in the South, you use apple cider vinegar for it. So it's even better. The right part of the South, not Alabama. Screw Alabama. All right. Anyway, that's right, Jonathan. All right. So, in fourth grade, it's getting near Easter. Now, if you are a Baptist minister, you don't have Lent. Lent is what Catholics do, and you are witnessing to them. I see a nod. I understand. Back then, religious diversity in rural North Carolina was what type of Baptist you were. So, I had an interreligious friend. He was a Presbyterian, and so, it wasn't till later, when we moved to a city and then I went to an art school that I found out that Catholics were Christians and that they have Lent. And actually most Christians for most of church history do that. But at our church, we were preparing our hearts towards Easter. So I thought, how do you prepare your heart towards Easter? Obviously, you read more about Jesus out of the Bible than your other friends. Let them know about it in your prayers so they knew that what you said was clearly full of Jesus. So I'm like, tell my parents, I'm going to be doing all my own quiet times at night. I'm going to read the Bible and pray. And I'm going to be going through all the stories of Jesus last week over Lent. And, Baptist ministers are just like, we've succeeded. Like when you talk about success as a parent, your kid's like 4th grade, like I just want to read the Bible more by myself. You're like, well, he's not going to go to hell now. So, I'm doing this. It's all going good. And it's like about a week out and I'm running through the Gospel of Luke because you go Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and I'm getting through Luke and I realize I'm having a very serious problem. So I call my parents to the room. Mom, Dad, my Bible's broken. And in a panic, what are you talking about, Trip? My Bible's broken. I think you should give me a new one. What do you mean it's broken? And, you know, as a Southern Baptist, you're like, well, I have a chart with Bible verses on it to show you. And I had been like mapping out what Jesus did in his last week in the different Gospels. And I don't know if you've done this. It's a real horrible idea to do if you're like the Bible's a holy inerrant word of God, because he dies on different days. I was like, oh, chunk. Different people see the resurrected Jesus first. I'm like, someone should have edited this. And I'm like telling my parents, I'm like, if you notice in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is sweat and blood, and then he gets on the cross. The only thing he has to say is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then at the end, like by the time you get to John, people go to arrest him. They're like, where's Jesus? And he goes, I am, which is like the Jewish name of God, the proper name of God. And they all fall over. Like the Bible says literally, they're like, where's Jesus? He goes, I am. Boom. And they fall over because he's in control of it. And I'm like, you can't sweat blood, get pissed your friends aren't praying for you. And then on the other side, they're like looking for you. And you're like, I got this, friends. I am. Boom. Fall down. Homeboy or buddy Peter slices some dude's ear off. And you're like, I got this. Pick it up. Pop. This is how we go. You don't need that sword over here. And then like by the time you get to John, he's like up on the cross and he's like, oh, wait, I have to fulfill a Bible verse. So they're like, oh, give me this sponge. He licks it. It is finished. Mic drop. Jesus. Boom. And it's like he's in complete control, not scared, not freaking out, compared to sweat and blood. Why did you forsake me, God? And I'm like sitting there and I have a nice chart. I'm sure I didn't say it exactly like this, but my parents say this is one of the scariest moments of their parenting. And so I'm sure it got worse over the years. But you know, I was told in my first preaching class in seminary, you should never let the truth get in the way of a good story. That was a joke. It was, but I mean, he did say that. But it was, anyway, I think he told it as a joke as well. Anyway, so we're sitting there and I'm like, this is nuts. Like, you really should have got an editor. I don't know if whoever, King James knew somebody that edited, but they could have put this junk together and it says authorized version. And I don't know who authorized it, but it was not the editor. It's a timeline screwed up. And my parents were like, no, that's what's in there. I'm like, you can't have Jesus ghost through walls in one and the other be like, look at my hole. I'm cooking fish and I'm going to eat it. And well, that's what's there. And now my parents later, when I asked them, I was like, what in the world did you do? Dad's like, we tried 4 different answers on you and you were having none of it. And I was like, what'd you say? He's like, well, first we said, well, if you read it closer, it all works out. And I was like, I got a chart. I was like, you can't tell me that the resurrected Jesus and or a gardener or an angel, just make your own chart. This is true. Says you'll meet me in Galilee or Jerusalem. They're not the same place. Like that would be like, hey fellas, let's hang out tomorrow in LA and or San Francisco. Like you have to go a completely different direction. Like what is it, editor in Germany? And they're like, some of those places over in Israel. So I was like, that's a horrible idea. And cause my Bible had maps in it. I love the maps part. I always had like these little, those little pins. We're like, oh, I want to visit this place. One time, I wasn't planning on saying this one. One time I had a vacation Bible school teacher was like that person. You remember those like, spinning things with picture cards? What were those called? It was like a projector, but it shot like your slide through it. A slide projector. Those dots got connected quick. Thank you very much. Well, he had a slide projector of pictures from Israel from like the 80s when he visited. And somehow almost every week in our little second grade Bible class, he managed to get his slide projector out and he would like turn it on and then like show it and be like, and this is when I walked where Jesus walked. And you're like, what? Anyway, so, in my head, I'm like, and he would like put pins on the map. So I knew Galilee and Jerusalem are very different places. And so I'm like, that doesn't work. Then my dad was like, well, then we told you that one of the ways you have to read it is not to read them alone, but to read them together. And I was like, what is that? Like, what is that? That's a horrible answer. Like, he's like, we were worried. He's like, it was one of those moments we knew we were failing as parents, but we liked the fact that you were reading the Bible and we wish we had a better answer. And then your mom said, Trip, when we went to Disney World? And I was like, well, you bring Mickey into this. Everyone's about to get happy. Magical kingdom and junk. So when we went to Disney World, if we all sat around and said, what happened at Disney World? We'd all tell different stories, but we really went there. And then you said, I guess that's good. And you went to bed. And, I don't think that's that good of an answer now. I mean, like as a fourth grader, that's fine. But to me, that moment was like that moment where like you were handed your faith and you're like, well, here, believe this. Believe what? The Bible. It tells you the truth. It's the word of God and junk. Just listen. And then all of a sudden I took what they said seriously and I was like, can you connect these dots? We have a number of ideas. We're going to give them to you until you stop asking questions. Hopefully the fact that we're ministers who plant churches and your parents, you will shut up soon. Because otherwise we don't know what to do as your parent if the shape of your belief is not just assenting to the truths that we were hoping you were going to believe. Dear Jesus, help us not fail as parents currently. Like that was like the experience. And I remember after that, I started asking questions, which my parents came up with this trick. If you ask a good question, my dad has his doctorate's in church history, which after that he said, well, I didn't know what to tell a little kid that's asking questions I didn't ask till college. So I just started handing you books. If you ask a question, I'm like, well, if you read this, we can talk about it. So in middle school, I got really into reading historical Jesus material. And so after the Enlightenment, there became this whole thing where they were like, we have all these things about Jesus. They don't actually line up that much. And what are we going to do about it? We're actually discovering all these texts from that historical period. Oh, crazy. Other people are talking about the same stuff. Maybe if we listen to Jesus in his own context, it would make more sense than if we listen to him in the context of creeds from the Middle Ages. Well, you giggle. Well, praise the Lord. Because then you find out Jesus was Jewish. What's up with that? I know. It really, I thought he was Baptist. And I was like, maybe Episcopalian. Because I always feel like Episcopalians are more likely to have beards in the 80s. Like beards are now, like everybody can do one. I couldn't do one until I was 24. But after that, I could do one. I really felt like I arrived. And, so I got into historical Jesus research and like I won the award for the Society of Biblical Literature, which is like the Guild of Biblical Historians. Like a couple thousand of them get together every year and read book papers no one should ever read in front of other people and think they understand it. I won their undergraduate award because I was so obsessed that by the time I went to undergrad, I'd read everything that I was getting assigned in undergrad about the historical Jesus and wrote papers on it and won. And like was this little 18-year-old showing up to read his paper in a room full of like professors. But the thing was like they saw it as like their job. Like there are historians like this is what we do. I was still pissed from fourth grade. Like I'm like, I gotta know, like this junk happen or not? And how do you decide these things? And I'll just save you at least half of my student loans. And a lot of time, like I have drank until early in the morning with N.T. Wright who's like kind of a more conservative New Testament scholar, and Marcus Borg and John Dominique Cross, some more progressive ones. And if you get them like not with a microphone on, I don't know. Well, Marcus is dead, so he can't get mad if he hears this. But that was the softest side. Manny edit that one out. There are basically only 5 things. Any of them like have like, you know, like an over 75% chance or super confident or straight up historical. And basically it's that Jesus is Jewish. He talked about the kingdom of God a lot. He healed people a lot, but lots of other Jewish leaders healed people a lot at that time. He had 12 disciples, and there's a long story as to why they have strong confidence that he had 12. And he managed to piss off Rome so much they killed him, in a means that they only killed political revolutionaries. Those are the 5 things they'll all agree on and be like, well, duh. Honestly, I never had a track that those things were on at all. Like when you come to Jesus at a Baptist church, they're like, did you want to join team Jewish homeless dude from the first century who talked a lot about the world ending, called it the kingdom of God, expected the least of these, the poor, to be lifted up and the powerful to have to get rid of all their stuff in order to get in. And he happened to go around working wonders for the least of these, moves city to city so it never gets monetized by it. And in the meantime, proceeds to piss off the religious culture, political power, and society so they all agreed occasionally, which is not very often in the first century, to kill him in your heart. Like, do you want him to go in your heart? And so, like, but if you are like going through this experience and then you go to college, and I was this thing called a musical theater and philosophy major. This is a level of hybridity. Hashtag POMO vocab word. How many people have heard the word hybridity before? All right. It was a level of performative intersectionality. Does that feel better? I was just saying this because I have debt that I have to pay off for student loans for learning these. Yeah, I had a level of interdisciplinary porous identity that led to a certain structure of performative reflection, namely theater, involving music and post-structuralist philosophy. Anyway, I was there. And so, you know, when I get into something, I like really get into it. So by the end of my first semester of being a philosophy and musical theater major, having like gone in ready to write these papers about the historical Jesus, I was like, well, I don't want to be a religion major. I want to be a philosophy major because that junk's legit. And obviously musical theater because that way you get really cool girlfriends. And, you know, most musical theater departments don't have like real first tenors. They have like halfsies. Anyway, so I got myself a tweed jacket with leather patches right on the elbows and a pipe because that's what philosophers do. And I was that person who like try to structure their postmodern existential angst outside. So like you get your pipe, a copy of Sartre, and you go outside and you aren't actually reading it. You're just hoping that someone shows up to you to ask what you're reading so that you can then talk to them about how there is zero meaning in the universe, that heat death is impending, the sun's going to swallow our planet, and no one will ever know that you smiled or cried. And that most of human beings are just trying to deny the reality of death and create all sorts of fan fiction they call religion for their mythological escapes, trying to not face the nihilistic end that is impending upon them. Which is like obviously what you want to do at parties. That's how you get popular in college. Because like you say that and they're like, just let's have some PBR. And you're like, that is really just the polar opposite way of denying your impending finitude and the inherent meaninglessness in all things. And they're like, are you going to play guitar or something? Because like, don't you sing? Like play some music. Stop talking about that. It's really downer. So like I was that guy and I was so good at being like a postmodern deconstructionalist. Like I would like straight up, like, you know, when someone's obnoxious as a nerd, they switch languages just to let you know they don't care if you know what they mean. They're just like, I want you to know that I know what I mean so much that I have zero interest as to whether you know what I mean. So let me say some French things followed by, that's why our lives are both meaningless, and if you just get over it, you won't give me a hard time for smoking tobacco products with leather patches on my elbow. It's a form of resistance to the man. You know what the man is? It's an anthropological, patriarchal projection of Western culture's desire to deny their impending finitude. Think on these things. Hashtag Foucault. That would be a philosopher. Anyway, so, I was like that dude. And then I got into social science because I'm like, obviously the next thing to do, if you aren't going to believe fairy tales, is to do social science. Because I was told, the Bible, this is just a divine document. And then I just outlined it, and that didn't work out. So then I'm like, well, yeah, I'm going to do science. So I got into science, got into philosophy of science, then was like that guy who was like, I don't want lab sciences. I just want the theory of science classes. Because you have to, if you do lab sciences and you aren't built for it, you have to write lab reports about your failures, which I had to wait till after 30 before I could report about my failures. That required therapy. I was like, I want all the non-lab sciences. So like astronomy, physics, like if it was math, we're all good. If it's like biology and chemistry, I'm like, I don't know how to do that stuff. So I got into that. Then I started subscribing to social science journals because I was like the guy who, like, the moment he had intuition should read everything about it and have an opinion about it. Cause obviously your friends care what you think. Yeah, I know, like I'm sure that's what you do. You sit down with your friends. You read any social science journals recently? So you could offer, as not being a parent, strong convictions as to what you should do as a parent? Like, I was that guy. Like, I'm 19. I'm like, well, I've read a recent social science article that, like bed training is really detrimental to developing their trust-mistrust area. So if your kid has some like real significant depression in early adolescence, it's probably because you made him sleep in a crib instead of in your bed. Like, as humans, we've really evolved like together in a bed, like forever. And it's really like late modern capitalism that started to create these patterns of distance. And then like your uncle who's 30 and has kids, he's like, Trip, I don't know what you're talking about. Like you just left your house and you've never paid for your health insurance. Why do you have theories of my parenting? And I'm like, it's actually not me. It's just science. And they get mad. But if I was like, it's not me. It's just the Bible. They would have been like, oh, okay. Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. You just don't do it about shellfish. In the South, you can't like throw the shellfish Bible verses in because fried shrimp is half sacred. Especially if it has hot sauce on it. So like I got to this point where I was like the worst. I was like, everything is just this meaninglessness and junk and everything, like, it's just like a set of divine text. And the problem was, as a preacher's kid, I never quit like actually reading the Bible and attempting to pray every day, even when I didn't believe in God, which is just a conundrum in and of itself. So just pause for a second, acknowledge that. And I had really sweet beginnings to prayers where I would go, God, should you exist and I know not what? You mean you don't do that in church? It's not how you keep your job as a minister, Tim. But in college, I was like that. So it came to Lent because I had taken church history and realized my Baptist friends got mad if I called it Lent. And then when they're like, that's Catholic. And I was like, you mean every Christian for the first 1600 years? So Lent, I'm like, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to go like it's like a form of self-torture at this point. I'm going to read all the ends of the gospel. Passion Week. Oh, that's how Catholics go. Passion Week. Last week of Jesus' life. I'm going to do it again. So I start going through it and I get to the point of, I'm reading through it. Now, if you're at a place where in your head you say, there is no meaning, all things are meaningless, there's impending death, and yet there's social science research that shows collective belief in mythology creates an in-group that shows higher life expectancy, better children, intergenerational support structures across kinship groups. I'm not joking. I said to myself, well, I should probably choose arbitrarily to operate in an, quote, as if structure in a historic wisdom tradition. I tried Taoism, but I was like way too Western. But I think Taoism is really the underrated Eastern religion. Like, cause I live in California, like you live in California, no one wants to go Buddhist because like Westerners that go Buddhist are annoying. Like real Buddhists, great. Like on my street, there's like real Buddhists. And then there's like the dude that grew up Presbyterian that's Buddhist. And he's like my least favorite. The real Buddhist is my favorite, except for the libertarian atheist, who's like the nicest person on the street. And it's not the atheism thing that irritates me. So like, I really like the, like, he's like, whoa, that's a good, anyway, I was trying. She's laughing the whole time. You start to giggle. Libertarian joke and the man buckles. Mark's a real nice guy. I told him that I say that joke every once in a while about him. And he said, you think I'm embarrassed to be a libertarian? Imagine being next door to a commie. And I was like, I'm not a communist. Anyway, so like I got to this point where I'm like, well, if it's like arbitrary, but there's good social science research that belonging to a religious community, especially if you don't hyperbolize the out-group hate, is beneficial to your well-being, then I want to pick one. I tried Taoism, didn't work out. I'm better at downloading meditation apps than using them. So like I'm going through reading the Gospels again, and I get to the Gospel of Luke. And this was a moment that the possibility of being simultaneously like a believer that's like, I'm going to read these because I want to know about God and junk, and a skeptic that goes, everything is meaningless. We're all going to die. Let's come up with some creative reasons to deny it until we really have to, and then hope they have medicine for it. All kind of collided. So at this point in my life, I'm like 20. I have a sweet, legit pipe collection. Patches. I'd even escalated to starting a Bible study called Holy Smokes, where you smoked your pipe, and we read the Bible and or J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm sorry. and we had little stitch-on badges of like Tolkien smoking a pipe. Anyway, for our Bible study. So, because Tolkien's like the edgy member of the Inklings. Because C.S. Lewis was like, so like, that was like so 90s. Like, you want to escalate, you go J.R.R. Tolkien. This is before the movies. Anyway, so like you get to this point, I'm reading through it, and I'm like doing it out of rote, just thinking my mom is probably going to ask, did you read all of the passion narratives out of the Bible again? Insert, you know I'm praying because I don't know if you're still a real Christian or not, but if you say yes to this, I'll feel better about it when I go to bed tonight, in subtle things she didn't say. So I'm like, I'll do it. So I get to the Gospel of Luke, and when Jesus is on the cross in the Gospel of Luke, it's the only one where he's like having conversations with homeboys next to him. You know, the others is like between people. Luke's just like, they had a conversation. And like one dude's just like talking junk to Jesus, and the other dude's like, we deserve this. Honestly, how many people have ever thought about the fact of having nails through their body, and they're going to hang there until liquid fills your lungs and you slowly suffocate, thinking to yourself, to talk to the guy next to you, taunting the person in the middle, hey, we deserve this. Like, I'm like, whoa, there's no like deserve it, like nailing someone up, slowly suffocating thing. This is what Tripp, the skeptic who thinks this thing is just a stack of stories to help us deny death. I'm like, this is how you know this junk is made up. Homeboy is just like, we deserve this. We're guilty sinners, Jesus. And other guys like, what are you talking about? There's no good reason you nail people up and watch them slowly suffocate. It's because Rome sucks. They're imperialistic. Blah, blah, blah. You're going to see him like, you're the worst dying person I've ever met. And he's like, no, we really did this. And I stole that apple. And Jesus, you don't deserve this. And like, dude over here, and these two characters are basically the internal versions of Tripp. Like, he doesn't deserve it. He went into Jerusalem while they're celebrating the Passover, which is when God kicked Pharaoh's butt. And now Rome occupies Jerusalem. He walks in, mocking them, and is here. Should not be surprising This is like he provoked it. It was probably on purpose. There's a reason he got here. I just am feeling very zen on the cross right now. And I really feel like, Jesus, you should have some really exciting words to say, because in this moment of existential despair and insight, if you could talk to me about how I could get to heaven right now, that would really help out this situation as I slowly suffocate and die. Of course, they're going to help you out and pierce your side where blood and water flowed, not us. They want you not to die on the Sabbath. But it's totally cool if we do. You already got whipped out. This is stuff you know from good revival sermons where, like, after they tell you you're a sinner and you have to bleed to get saved, they describe slowly what the torture of Jesus is like. Like, oh, you know, and like they give this thing. So Jesus, like, I'm like reading this, and this is Tripp's like internal head. Like, you can imagine like super holy version of Tripp, super like this is BS version talking. And then Jesus says this. He goes, like, he says like, oh, you'll be with me in paradise today, which then sets off nerdy Tripp, who says, technically, Luke is the only gospel that suggests that you are inherently immortal. Paul is very clear that you are not immortal and that you're going to die and stay dead unless God gives you new life. And that all new life is given at the eschaton. So Luke is a heretic. You're not naturally immortal. When you die, you stay dead. And God gives you new life at the eschaton, when at like the fulfillment of history. There's no like you die and you have an immortal soul that goes to heaven. That's not biblical Christianity, except for this one scene in Luke and then the story earlier in the gospel that is a parable and not a real story about metaphysics. Nonetheless, in my head, I'm sitting there going like, this is stupid. Like, people listen to this and then they think in themselves as Christians, oh, we have these immortal souls that float in the sky. And the Bible doesn't believe that junk. Just read the Bible. I mean, this is what's going in my head. And I'm like, and this is why. Because Jesus was just trying to be nice to this pious religious person who's trying to get a good word while he's slowly suffocating. So Jesus is like, dude, you'll be with me today in paradise. He's letting him off the hook. He's not like really telling him what's going to happen. He just wants the homeboy who's slowly dying, that's trying to get all religious on him, to shut up. This is Tripp's very angsty version. And then it gets to this moment, and he says, so Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I remember at that moment this weird experience where I go, since I'm currently a free agent for baseless meta-narratives that provide a social, scientifically approved space for us to have positive relationships that contribute to the well-being of its participants and its neighbors, should one operate in a performative as-if structure, meaning you act as if it's true even though you know there is no such thing as truth. And I was going to pick one. It should be one where the innocent person says, Father, who probably doesn't exist, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then if something's going to be true, it should be so beautiful that the innocent, justice advocating, radically love embodying person says, Father, forgive them. So if God was going to exist, or you were going to pretend so, for your child's obviously good cognitive development, then it should be the one where the innocent person says, forgive them. And I'm like, that's a decent reason. Like, and I remember this moment. I go outside and smoke my pipe and pace back and forth, contemplating my finitude. And then I get to this moment, and here's the reason why I remember it, because I burnt myself. Like, I went like this when like the insight happened, and I went to a rural college in North Carolina. So when you walked outside and smoked your pipe, all the stars are staring at you. You don't get to do that here. You get too much city glow. Like, you're only like kind of aware of how vast the universe is. But in the middle of nowhere with no trees, and then you smoke your pipe and have existential moments and look up, junk is for reals. And so I was like, and like the coal out of the middle of the pipe like went in my hand, and it broke. And I remember it because it was like, and they know not what they do became the line that popped in my head. Which then is just a good postmodern deconstructionist. I said to myself, if there was going to be a sentence that correlated to truth, it would be one in which the master signifier of the ultimate, that is just nerdy speak for the thing that operates as like God or truth or the one or whatever. The master signifier of the ultimate says they know not what they do. What are they doing? Killing the innocent one. What's his response? Father, forgive them. And then these people are so screwed up they don't even know what they're doing. Like their self-awareness is so bad. They probably say that I'm following orders, or he broke religious rules, or this is danger to the empire. They're doing what they were told because they were handed a script, handed a reality when they were born, and maybe they modified it a little bit, but they're basically doing what they found themselves told to do when they were born, just like me. And the reason I'm reading this story and not some other story is because my parents are Baptist minister kids. But if one of them is going to be embraced as if it could contain truth, it should be the one where the person says, Father, forgive them, and then admits the only true thing that we could postulate as truth if truth is a believable thing, namely that they don't know what they're doing and we don't either. And I think for that purpose, I shall re-embrace my identity as a follower of Jesus and bracket the discussion about the reality of God, because this way of being in the world is one that's centered on radical forgiveness and radical honesty about how so much of what we believe to be true is determined by who our parents were and where we were born, and not by like encounters with the divine or truth or reality. And the crazy thing that happened out of that was if you just stop asking the big questions and are like, I'm just going to operate at the level of doing this, then you start doing things Jesus said without having to work out why it makes sense, because you were just like, whatever. He thought the world was going to end, and he's a first century Jewish prophet. But you start doing things. So he says, like, pray for your enemies and those that persecute you. Well, I was in college on September 11th, and I was a sophomore, which means you're a draftable age. And if you're at a religious college on 9/11, and it is one of your mandatory chapel days, because nothing says adult ownership of your faith like compelling teenagers to show up to pray and sing and worship at 8:30 a.m. twice a week. Yeah, just think about that. Well, 9/11 said we're getting dressed for mandatory chapel, and the first plane hits, and my roommate and I, philosophy majors, first plane hits, and you are just beginning to make all jokes that you'll never repeat again after the second plane hits, because you're college students, and like, oh, a drunk plane driver, or, everything that would come up, you're like, oh my goodness, what is going on? And then when the second plane hits, right as we're going out to mandatory chapel, everything changes. And all of a sudden, whoever that Southern preacher was that was preaching the obligatory sermon that we all had to attend, at least 70% of them every week to graduate, they check your card as you come into church, because that's called freedom of conscience. Freedom of conscience is one of the 4 things all Baptists believe until you're paying tuition. Then you have to pay and go to worship. It's Campbell University. So I had friends that have transferred back and forth between Liberty and Campbell. So I go in, and homeboy that's speaking, sometimes the Lord lays things on your heart, and sometimes you have indigestion, and I'm pretty sure that his was indigestion and there was some miscommunication, because he said, he was like, now I just got to tell y'all, as Christian Americans in a day like this, where the Lord is. Now you may be saying to yourself, let's think about Jesus. In situations of dramatic tragedy, where might he have been? We have stories where he goes to the broken and tends to them. That's one option. We have stories where he is the broken. That's another option. We have him redirecting his followers in violent conflicts towards caring nonviolently for their enemies and saying you pray for them. That's an option he did not take. Well, I've never read this story in the Bible, but I'm sure it was true because he was very confident. He said, now the Lord and your country and your grandfathers, which at that point I feel like every female should be really good. Like it's not their grandmothers that's about to be elicited for whatever act he's about to act. They're like, well, that's good. We're not involved in this. And your grandfathers are telling you to get ready for the war of the ages. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, what? And he goes into this rant about Revelation and Daniel and Bible verses, and that this was somehow connected to some Bible verse. And we have to get ready because like this is going to set up like a clash between Christians and Muslims and all this stuff. And it ends with a red heifer in Jerusalem and Jesus comes back and he like goes into it. And at the end, he's just like, you got to get ready to join the army. And I was like, well, we go outside and in a school full of Christians, after an hour and a half mandatory service like that, they all say to themselves, you know what we need to do? Prayer circle. So they get in a prayer circle, hundreds of people in a prayer circle, and they aren't praying. They're like trying to out Jesus each other why they pray. And cause you have like your friend who's like talking to you, but then he starts praying and all of a sudden he says, dear Lord, today, you know, like, and you're like, you're a 19-year-old. How all of a sudden did you sound like a TV preacher in their 60s? So they do this prayer circle and my roommate Mike and I are sitting next to each other and he's getting angsty, like, cause you're holding hands for an hour, slowly going around a circle where everyone's trying to demonstrate their piety, trying to rally the troops literally for Jesus. And in my head, I'm like, oh no, you can't like walk away from a prayer circle. And, you know, like that's bad for your PR. Like my Jesus street kid is going to drop dramatically, but I also don't want to like pray a prayer that's like, let's go kill some people. That's not good. And so I'm like trying to come up with a very strategic way of responding. And I'm thinking, and all of a sudden my roommate Mike just like pieces out. And I'm like, pretend like you're going to help him and then you don't have to do this. So I like start to chase Mike down and I'm like, Mike, dude, what's going on? Like, oh, glad that's over. And I'm like, what's going on? He's like, Mike is a much more conservative Christian. So like when he uses curse words, they mean it. Like it's not, he stubbed his toe. Like in being his roommate until I got married, I like remember 5 or 6 of them and he used 3 of them that day. Like, and he looks at me and you know, people that are so Southern Baptist that like they contemplate each letter of the curse word before it gets there. But like, if you remember it, it all of a sudden like has a depth that you don't even get to curse that way. You're like, I wish I could do that. Maybe if my kids never hear me curse and then I occasionally pull it out, it could drop like that, but I can't. So he like turns and looks at me. I'm like, what's wrong? And he goes, trip. And I'm like, oh my God, it's not good. And when he does this is like, I'm thanking for the word thing, Mike. And he goes, and he's like shaking. And I'm like, oh my God, there's something else going on. What's this? And he goes, trip. This is bullshit. And like, it's like, you should go ahead and say it. Like, you don't have to like half say it. It's like you remove the T and it doesn't count or something. He's like, shit. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, dude, like today sucks. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be right now. Be amorphous friend and follow where it leads, which is good practice for being married. So I'm like, what am I supposed to apologize for? Is something wrong? I don't know. I can take responsibility for it or solidarity with you in it once I know which way we're going. And he's like, this shit. And I was like, what is it? He goes, there's only one damn thing in the Bible Jesus told us to do today. And I was like, he's cursed 3 times. Pray for your enemies. And no one's done it. I'm done. And he walks off. And I was like, that's legit. Like, he was one of the most Christian Christians I knew. And so, like, we get back, and he's like, get back to our room, and he's like got a poster board up. He's a Christian Christian's also like cheesy artsy, not like a theater major. Like, every day's a craft day. Like, if you were his girlfriend, you would like randomly find crafts, and the right one that he married, now is his best man. She really appreciates it. Like, I would be like, oh my God, that's creepy. I made a paper mache heart. It's just anyway. So I come in, and he's got this poster board thing. He's always like updating, and on it, he has written this like prayer for our enemies of who like flew the planes in. And it's on our wall, which is not the greatest place to invite your Christian friends at a Bible school in to your room, because they want to just talk to you about the Bible, not do what Jesus said. And so it's up there. And so, like, you know, after that, you can't be like, Mike, dude, tone it down. But, so I'm like, well, that's a new addition. He's like, as long as they're doing this stuff, we're just going to do what Jesus says in this room, Trip. Are you against praying for our enemies like Jesus said? No, I'm good. All right, let's do it. And he like wanted me to like group read his prayer. And I'm like, all right. And I'm like, God, today we know we have enemies and we are scared. Help our fear not lead to poor decisions, but inspire us to love through our fear to those that hate us. Help like develop understanding. Like in this, like, it's like everything like you wish you wanted to say but didn't. And so, like, and I'm like, oh, well, hopefully this will pass. Months later, people come into our room. He's like, let's pray. And he'll like turn towards it. And he's like, told me basically, you got to cooperate, because these Jesus freaks on our hall aren't going to do this. And this is the only thing Jesus said. So we're basically going to make them do it. And so over time, like, people would come in our room and they would just kind of know that you have to do this. And they're like, yeah, pray for we have fear, help us, blah, 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 blah. So it got up there. He didn't like always do it. So then like, well, a year and a half later, when the bombing starts in Iraq, because those dots are clear, I remember watching it, and that prayer had been there, and I call him, and I remember the existential feeling of junk is blowing up, so I feel better. Like, I had more peace, even though we'd started a war, and I felt better about it, even though I hated feeling better about it. And I called Mike and was like, dude, I have more peace right now, even though we just started a war, and that makes no sense. And then he goes into his prayer. And like, that was the moment where I thought, I have no idea if it's true. If something should be true, it's one that says, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. And that a life operating in the space, in the story that Jesus reveals, is one where its verification, to me, became plausible because of its beauty. Now, professionally, I'm like a philosopher of religion and have lots of feelings about lots of it. But I say that because it used to be a battle of a believer over here and a skeptic there, or an atheist here and a theist there, and they argue about junk. And the assumption is that if we're just rational, there's a conclusion that makes sense. And now that does not make sense. Like, we know that we're thrown in the world, we're in a family, we're in a world, and we pick up most of what we'll ever think based on that. We know that if you're a Christian and you're like, Jesus, oh, that's right, image of the invisible God, who was a homeless Jew in the first century in a 13.9 billion year universe, and we are just a minor planet in a mediocre galaxy. So yeah, that's reasonable. Or you're on a street and there's multiple other sacred stories that are just as deep and beautiful there, and they are better humans than you. Or you just start thinking like Freud, Marx, and Nietzsche, and then you realize that we don't even know if we believe what we believe because we really believe it, or if we just have mommy issues. Like, we don't know if what the best explanation of what matters to us most is something we don't know? It's in our unconscious. Well, at that point, there's no longer a rational reason to have like this theist here and atheist here. That dividing line runs right down the middle of us. And we're all believing skeptics, skeptical believers, and stuck in a world wanting beauty and truth and goodness and a life of depth and meaning. And we don't have a place to like plant a flag and be like, now let me just walk towards truth. But we do have narratives and stories and communities and relationships where we can say, let's live as if this is true, and the compelling thing becomes the beauty of the relationships and transformations that come out of it. So, so now, Tim, I'm glad my 15-minute intro is done, but we're going to do breaks.
We're going to take 5, and then I'm going to tell you why Tripp is still a Christian. And I'm going to ask him some pointed questions. And if you have any questions as well that you would like to ask him in terms of this new reality for the believing skeptic, could you please come talk to me during the break? And then I will incorporate those into our time together. But yeah, bathroom break, grab another beer if you want. And then we'll have a short Q&R session with Tripp. And then we'll hang out and you can ask him how he learned to talk that long and still say something meaningful. All right.
Turn your lights down low.
All right, we're going to come back together, and I am going to ask Tripp some pointed questions about his heresy, and it's going to get a little zesty. So just to begin, one of the things that I love about Tripp is that he has the ability to integrate deep philosophical and theological intuitions into his own story. And I think as I listen to you tell your own story from coming from this place of being raised by a Baptist minister and then coming to a place engaging more deconstructive philosophical notions and coming to a place where you had to re-engage the faith of your youth in a new way, I'd love for you to talk about how that transition happened in the sense that many of us carry both faith and doubt in the same person. But for you, it seemed like that story of Jesus on the cross, and Luke specifically talking about, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. There was something that compelled you about that story to a new place in your faith that was beyond a lot of the deconstruction. So could you tell us what it was about that was such a compelling experience for you?
So the line, Father, forgive them, to me is an affirmation that's about as beautiful as it gets. I mean, if you think of the entire narrative of the gospel and Jesus and such, God's identity as Abba is essential. And to say Abba, like the parentally intimate, loving parent of all, forgive them, that's an affirmation that's central. And then for they know not what they do is an affirmation of questions. And so, like, to me, the transition in my faith was one where to have faith was to have questions, and questioning and doubt were an essential element. And the other side of the other place it made sense to me was when I got married, which in the South, you get married a lot younger because you don't drink, smoke, or have sex until you get married. And so obviously Jesus wants you to get married at 20. And so, like, when you get married and you're in this relationship and you're like, yeah, we're going to be together forever, you go in with this idea of the person, which justifies you making that decision. Then you find out they aren't the person you thought they were. But luckily, obviously, they're going to change. And then you find out they're not going to. And then you find out you have to figure out how to love the person that's there. And in that process, I came to realize that part of what a genuine loving relationship is that you actually love the giant mystery you're related to, not the version of them in your head that is some objective construction that you have. And that part of staying in relationship is preserving the mystery of the subject, the other. And like part of that means doubt. Part of that means mystery. Part of that means risk and vulnerability. That's all entailed in a loving relationship. And so like the idea that genuine faith with God would somehow be less mysterious, risky, and doubt-filled than with a human is nuts. Like I know who her parents are, and she still doesn't make sense.
Yeah. No, I hear you. There's something about that subjectivity that you just described that does highlight the idea that even though we know one another, in maybe even in the biblical sense of knowing somebody, there's always a deeper
foot massage. In Hebrew, that's what it's talking about.
Yeah, I think that's exactly.
Anytime you see people talking about feet in the Bible,
yeah,
that's called a Jewish edit.
Right. I think it's Ruth, maybe. Yeah,
and Boaz just rub his feet.
Ladies.
Biblical
Gentlemen.
Persuasion.
Yeah. Okay. So that being said, there's always more to know. There's always a mystery to delve into. And one of the things that I love about oration and about storytelling is that you get to inspire, or we should, when we preach and when we talk, inspire this kind of romance with the mystery of the divine. And that's been something that's been a part of our tradition for a long time. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but Christianity in the 21st century has had a bit of a PR problem, namely Christians acting in public. And there's other things that are functioning there as well. But the point of this is that I wonder out loud, and I wonder your thoughts on this, if that the inspiring that Christianity is trying to do in a lot of ways is inspire a form of belief that is no longer culturally functioning. And I wonder if we inspired instead this romance or this idea that we have a mystery and a beauty in life that we can orient ourselves to and pursue, if we might be a little bit better off in inviting people into participate in the life of following Jesus.
Yeah, I think that a lot of faith communities miss the distinction between an invitation to faith and an invitation to 1940. And
yeah.
You're a minister, I'm a minister, and now I consult with lots of churches and stuff. Like if you go pick up a church's bylaws, there's a reason most churches get rid of their bylaws committee. And that's because they got perfected a long time ago. Yeah. So like the last 7 years, I worked at a very large UCC church. And our bylaws committee had not had 2 meetings in a year since 83. And I said...
1983?
Yeah, 1983, okay. Which was when I was 1. And so at some point I said, do we even operate by these things? They've worked for us well. And I'm like, what does that mean? Right. So I think a lot of times, and this is true about all of us though, but you know what? It's so much easier to see habits that are not helpful in other people than yourself. So you want to know all the people I know who can make small dietary and exercise changes and lose weight? Large. I'm just not one of them. So I think a lot of us get trapped in our normal where when we put stuff on the table, we are not willing to think, doubt, consider, call mysterious, and become vulnerable to 98% of it. It's just like, here's the 2% that we're working with. And then you're just passing along a lot of conclusions that were really efficient and effective at a different time. Mm-hmm. And part of faith, I think, is faith is inherently a risk in opening yourself and becoming vulnerable. And if we don't recognize that, then what we start protecting are conclusions and not the conditions that faith becomes genuine.
Right. Love it. I mean, yeah, I think that the conditions that you're describing are indicative of our day and age. And I think many of us who grew up Christian or have some kind of engagement with the tradition itself can attest to what it feels like to try to talk to our friends about said convictions. And so one of the things that we had a question during the break from the audience about was, how do we make what you presented to us practical, in the sense that you have a lot of highly refined philosophical opinions, and you are able to, if you want, nerd out and use a lot of big words that might, for some people who are just wrestling with how do I practically follow Jesus today, they may not land in the same way that they do for you. So one of the questions we had was really, how do we develop a practical faith for the 21st century in this new reality? Like, what does it look like to live it out, and what does it look like in community?
So one part of figuring out when you show up and do a live podcast is normally a large conversation, whereas they listen to the next episode, the guest probably hates half of what the previous one did. Is like, what do you do at the beginning that doesn't undo what you hope you do every week? And part of it is performing a version where, like, you hear multiple versions of me. And if I'm here affirming, like, this is all part of my story, then maybe we can all get to the point where, yeah, I may think, like, all these different instantiations of me are wrong in this place, or that was stupid. But then there are also places when I was young, I'm like, that was beautiful, and now I'm way too big of a wuss to do that again. And that kind of stuff. So if you, like, go, a lot of us see our faith as a conclusion and not a process. But in my process, I've operated in many different places. Some of them that if someone hears me and they're like more progressive than me or whatever, I'm like, yeah, I did that. Like, I straight up was a Taoist that read Jesus for hate reasons and back into being Christian. Or, I'm more conservative than you. That's nice. I've won academic awards for arguing for the physical resurrection. Like, that's all part of Tripp's own story. Right. And I think a lot of us see these conclusions or these boundaries as who we really are. Yeah. And part of the practical part is going, no, that's not the case. Like, the reason Alicia and I are about to have our third kid in our 15th year of marriage is not because we are our conclusions or our boundaries. It's because we have continued to wake up and show up to the fact that we love each other, even though we don't even know what that means, and we'll keep figuring it out. And the conclusions we have a lot of times been temporary. And I remember straight up in early marriage, we'll have a conversation all right, yeah, this is who we are. We're going to do this forever. Some of them are straight up super Jesus, couple prayer before bed. Mm-hmm. Great idea until you have a kid. You want to know what happens after you have a kid?
What?
If one of you if the kid goes to sleep, everyone tries to go to sleep. And you want to know who taps in first. And you're just like, Jesus, talk to me in my dreams, because if I lose 30 minutes of sleep, I'm going to curse the baby out. And all of a sudden you're like, yeah, but we decided that we were going to close our days in prayer. And you're like, no, we were going to close our days not that way, because we just needed sleep to not hate each other while we're trying to have a kid who had 14 ear infections in a year. I don't hate you, Aaron. I just want this is not a hate on my son. But Elgin's a beautiful boy. I just hope that his new brother that's coming in a few weeks has higher functioning ears. But
that's a prayer that every parent prays for, I'm sure.
But I say that just because part of the practicing part is giving you permission that the only thing you're responsible for right now is you and where you are. You're responsible for what you say, do, how you deal with your feelings. and you're responsible to other people. But a lot of us feel like we're actually responsible for other people. Probably our parents with expectations, or our church members, or our friends. We're responsible for them, and we have to meet all this stuff to meet their expectations. And then we get weighed down, we get anxious, we start thinking about them instead of dealing with just us and God and the world, and we get overwhelmed, and we're like, oh, what do I do with this, and what do I do with that? There's a certain practicality of freeing yourself to just, so there was a moment for like a year or so. It was not my idea, so it was Alicia's. And she has, my wife and I are both ordained ministers, so this, she's pretty awesome. And she had this idea after listening to me say crap like this. You know those like markers that write on mirrors? All right.
Yeah.
I didn't know they existed.
Mirror markers? Yeah.
Yeah. So she wrote on our mirror, like when you get out of the shower, you have permission to be wrong.
Oh,
you have permission to change your mind. That was it.
So she's God?
No, but with this, like you look at yourself and go,
I'm just kidding.
You have permission to be wrong. You have permission to change your mind. Like you say that like, duh, obviously you do. Maybe. A lot of us understand our relationship to God in ways that that's not information we have. If you read the Bible and think of Abraham to Paul and every version that's in between, and you don't have permission to change your mind or be wrong, we're screwed. Like David, not an awesome character. Man
after God's own heart. Hello.
Look, we'd have to raise the podcast rating to go through David's poor life decisions.
Yeah.
But I just mean that part of the practical part is giving yourself permission to admit what you're doing. The other side of it is, I told the story about Mike and him putting a stupid prayer for your enemies on the wall, which, God love him. That story, as annoying as it was, and then like all of a sudden there's a callback to it, led to me realizing Jesus had a certain brilliance. Like if you listen, he gets asked 148 questions in the New Testament and answers 2 of them. He's the world's worst theology professor. I try to answer all of them. Not well, but with verbosity.
Yeah, that's a word.
It is in German. It's a German philosophical. He doesn't answer questions, tells stories in which there's millions of pages trying to understand them, all of which think the other one's wrong or possibly true. Yeah. And then, when he's clear about 2 things. If you are rich and obsessed with being rich and don't care for the poor, you're in trouble. Or if you're hardcore religious and you turn it into a form of religious judgmental bigotry, you're screwed. That's when Jesus pulled out the, if I believed in hell, you might want to watch it card. Yeah. None of them were look, I showed up, I healed somebody. If you haven't asked me in your heart right now, screw you. My daddy's going to throw you down. So to me, Jesus is not giving answers and fixing things. He dodges it, tells cool stories we keep talking about. But what is he definite about? Invitation to a community where you practice things. Right. He's oh, who's my neighbor? Let me tell you a story where whoever you don't think counts. So for me, it might be a Rush Limbaugh fan who's also a Calvinist libertarian. That'd freak me out. He's you want to know who your neighbor is? A libertarian Calvinist Rush Limbaugh listener. And I'm that doesn't work. I'm supposed to be doing my PhD in California in philosophy. You're not allowed to be a libertarian Rush Limbaugh fan, and let alone be a Calvinist. So, but for other people, they're oh, this is my other. Yeah. And Jesus is yeah, we want to know who your neighbor is. Well, where's that growing edge at? I'm going to tell you a story where it's that person. And you tell that story because the answer to the question is not an answer. It's a person, or it's a community, or it's an enactment. So the practical side of faith is that Jesus honestly did not care about your theology. He cares about the conclusions it brings you to. So if you pray for your enemies, you love your neighbor, you care for the least of these and all that, and then get asked some stupid question that I probably will write a book about, then he's that's legit. Did it inspire you to care for your enemies, love those who persecute you, pray for, that's it. So to me, one of the beautiful places of letting yourself off the hook of every Christian in the world having to write in their head the world's greatest systematic theology, then you can waste your energy on actually having to do what Jesus asked you to do and finding friends to do it with. And that's like the most practical part, I think, of his challenge.
Right. Well, I mean, I think one of the things that you're highlighting that's really important for this conversation is that there's this shift today from Christianity that functions in your life as a way of believing the right things. And he's articulated that a couple of times in talking about, creating a systematic theology or coming to a more highfalutin philosophical opinion about some issue. But then there's the way that those things that you believe function in your life and actually form you into a certain kind of person in the world. And it's that shift from a Christianity that functions as solely as a way of believing into a Christianity that functions as a way of being in the world that is one of the most relevant ways to inhabit faith today. But the interesting thing about that, I think, is that this is straight up Peter, I think. You know what I mean? Like, this is like faith without works is dead. And we're not talking about a works gospel necessarily. What we're talking about is, for too long, the hypocrisy that has stood with a public facing, maybe even go to hell sign or something like that. And so for those of us who are endeavoring into this new way of being, where we're trying to be a community of people who practices things like we mentioned before. I mean, with what we're doing with the Way Collective, that emphasis is really on the way of being. And, I just think that there's too much of religion that continues to fragment our world, and we have an opportunity to unite under these practices. And so, that being said, is there any other way that you would encourage people to walk in the 21st century in this reality? I mean, we've talked about a number of things so far tonight, but what are some of the ways that you see sustainability moving forward?
Well, so before I started being a professor all the time and worked at churches, my favorite answer to that question is I facilitated communities where we would bring groups together, and the opening, you would invite people of joining an intentional spiritual formation group for a period of time. And in the opening retreat, do you want to join a spiritual formation group around the way of Jesus or whatever, something like that. And, different people in our church, as a large church, would want to put it together. Some would be from our congregation. Most of them would be from elsewhere. But you go on an opening prayer retreat, and basically I would tell them enough stories and be like, I have no interest in trying to prove to you anything, and here's the thing, we're going to spend these months doing experiments in truth, where as a community, we practice these practices together, and then you can have whatever feelings you want about the answers to big questions. Which, now you're my friend. You know that if I would, Tripp's natural disposition is to fine-tune particular interpretations of particular philosophers. I have visceral responses to how you date the Gospel of Matthew and what it means for it to be a Jewish community. Tripp has very strong opinions. And I'm just saying, in those groups, in it, every week when you're doing our experiments, you would have, what was your big God question each week? And I had a giant fishbowl, and you'd put it in it, and the group always ran over, and we never answered one. But we did cycles of every month an experiment. So, for example, first month, and they were all based on the Sermon on the Mount. So opening is just blessed identity, blah, blah, blah. So one time we did an experiment in gratitude. Well, if by the 30th day, when you're trying to give very specific things that you're grateful for, you run out because your mom is only on the list once. And days 15 to 30, when you're doing it and you're in a text group and you're sharing it, and then other people are coming up with weird random things in their day to be grateful for, and then you're like, oh, John, well, they're grateful for that. I could be grateful for this. And by the end of it, you're just like, why do people hate life? I didn't get a mosquito bite today because I don't live in the South anymore. And when it rains, 20 minutes is a lot. And if you have avocados here, they don't taste like glue.
Welcome to California.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, once you're in a community and you're like, we're attending to gratitude every day, all of a sudden you start thinking gratitude. And you're like, well, they thought this, they thought this, they thought this. And you're getting a little text. And the next thing you're in a meeting with the person that pisses you off regularly. I don't need to name names, but if you're in gratitude mode, all of a sudden they say like that one thing that could be interpreted as an affirmation through their passive aggressive hate and jealousy for your productivity. And you're just like, you're welcome. And you feel better about it. Like we did one where at judgment, do not judge. That's a stickler. Every person loves that one. Even the non-religious. They're like, if there's one verse in the Bible those religious people should do, they should do the Jesus not judge part. And then stop talking to me. Well, if you do the don't judge thing, we did an experiment in not judging. We created a prayer before it for the people we judged. And every day as you collected the people, you prayed this prayer for them at night. Crazy thing. Half the people every day prayed that prayer for themselves. What do you learn in an experiment in truth around do not judge? That most of us would rather think that Jesus telling us not to judge is about us wanting not to be judged by other people, or for the people we love not to be judged by, the people that are clearly wrong about whatever is really important to us. And the weird, crazy thing is the biggest overlap of everyone every day is how much we judge the person in the mirror.
Yeah.
And when you every night pray that you not be the person that imparts to an other created in the image of God a dignity beneath that which God gave them. And you look at yourself in the mirror, the next day looks different. And it creates a habit and creates a practice. Now, I did that plenty of times, not even knowing if I really believed in God, but I'm not saying like, if it was going to be true, it's a really beautiful thing. And I'll tell you the number of people in my life that were like, I'm glad. And so like this sense of how does it reframe what's really practical? Jesus invites us into lots of activities that are super costly and super filled with learning opportunities. And they're unrelated to you having to know science, philosophy, biblical studies, blah, 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 blah. I think they're all cool. And if you want to learn it, I'm totally down. It's my favorite hobby of all time. So, but I'm just saying like what you learn in a practice of discovering that do not judge was not about the other, but about you, is super releasing. Yeah. And you want to know who can benefit from that? You could be a libertarian, Republican, a Democrat, a socialist, independent, whichever that means, and everything in between. You could be a Calvinist, Arminian, you have Presbyterian, a Buddhist. Like, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Like, all of those things. If you learn to wake up in the morning and when you see yourself as affirmed and not deficient.
Right.
And that is one of the most powerful, freeing things. It's everything I want to do as a parent. And then I discovered I couldn't do it for myself and wonder whether or not I could do it as a parent. Right. And I was like, oh, John, Jesus just helped me out. Pretty good for a homeless Jew who failed at all the things he wanted to do. That's the critical side. I'm like, he didn't even win, blah, 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 blah. And the next thing I'm like, I did what he said. And all of a sudden, everything's different. Yeah. So like sticking with practices and letting people figure the other stuff out, I think is a wonderful asset because it's so much easier to like hang out with people that you disagree with and aren't sure about if you thought to yourself, in this week, we were all trying to figure out how not to judge people, and we all prayed for each other and cared. And only half of us thought God existed. Like, it's beautiful. But if you show up at a place where there's a stack of a priori, which is just a philosopher speak for you've already decided before discussing, because that obviously is the best way to truth beliefs, then you come in and the whole time you're trying to discuss and be honest, but in your head you're like, does this fit in the preconditions? Like, that's over there. And how many homeless itinerant philosophers do you know that lost sleep about those? Very few. So that's why I don't think Christians should. Jesus was like not worried about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think what you're describing is really important because we all come to
this place tonight at different points in our journeys. And I hope that one of the things that everyone understands, although they may not have understood everything that was said tonight, was that it's okay. It's okay to be where you are. It's okay to be who you are right now. And it's really important, too, that we hold our beliefs with a certain amount of lightness. And because it's so easy for them today in this age to die the death of a million criticisms. I mean, all it takes is the next book you read for you to, have to throw out everything that you once held to be true. And so the point is that I think that there is a way forward in the sense that if we are able to have the openness to hold our beliefs lightly and also to allow them to be formed into practices in our lives that shape us in a certain way, to become people who live lives with more intensity and urgency and depth and passion and expansive love, that just seems like a more zesty invitation to me. And it is why we're forming this community, and it is why we hope to move forward in a community that is focused on shared practices and values rather than beliefs. I think that our beliefs are deeply embedded in everything that we do. So it's not like a lot of those are going anywhere, unless you read that one book, of course, that you're not supposed to read. But it's not that our beliefs are going anywhere. It's that our lives are saturated in belief. I mean, I believe this chair is going to hold both of us up, so I sat next to you, But the reality is that as we take our faith, which you could even talk about it in terms of tribe, if we're a part of this continuation of a Christian tribe, and it means something different today to be a part of a tribe because of the digital world that we live in, we have access to all of these other beautiful tribes with different stories, with alternative belief systems and convictions. I guess where I'm heading with this is it's important for us who are still living the Jesus way to structure ourselves in such a way that our beliefs aren't ultimatized because of how vulnerable they are. Now, at the same time, as we are a part of a tribe that is attempting to move forward, one of the things that you talked about in this class that you just did called The Believing Skeptic was that there's this idea that we're moving from, what was the first one? It's not manifestos. What was the other one?
Before that?
Yeah. Moving from, I got the word here. You're moving from manuals to manifestos. Oh,
yeah.
Right?
You got to go with alliteration.
Yeah, you got to double in.
Otherwise, they'll never believe you're a minister.
It's M&M.
M&M. Manuals to manifestos.
There you go. So here's what I said all that to say. If we are to move into this 21st century reality, where the believer and the skeptic live within the same person, if we are to place our emphasis on a way of being in the world, specifically the way that loves our enemies, that prays for those that persecute us, if you were to have to give a manifesto for this tribe off the top of your head, and I know you're really good at preaching impromptu sermons, and maybe we can close with this question unless there's any remaining ones from the tribe.
Well, we can just hang out and answer questions.
Or we can just hang out and share life together.
I mean, I'm not saying that just because I have to use the restroom.
No, yeah. It's
because I want
reason.
to give personal attention to every question that's possible.
Personal attention. What would that manifesto sound like?
All right, I'm ready. You nod when it... Listen, believing skeptics. Here's the thing. You have permission to be wrong, but you don't have permission to ask crappy questions. You only get one life. And the universe has been working for 13.9 billion years to have someone that knew it was thinking. And if you only want your life to be determined by all the things you inherited and not all the things you can do, go for it. But if you ever thought that your life could have mount to something deeper, that you could harness it, that you could explore and engage in the depth of meaning, then as a believing skeptic, here's a trick. Don't waste your time flipping around in shallow puddles. Dig deep. And here's the thing. The universe and human beings have a stack of wisdom traditions. One of them, Team Jesus. I prefer that one. But here's the thing. A lot of people feel like they are autonomous. They have to rediscover the universe. They have to rediscover wisdom. They have to rediscover everything and figure it out. Probably watch it on their little trackers, on their life, on their Facebook thing, and then rediscover depth and meaning all over again. That is very, very depressing. Honestly, you're never going to go very far if you're splashing in puddles. You should go work with a whale. Not like Jonah. I'm talking like a whale where you drop a bucket down deep and you find water. There was a mystic named Meister Eckhart, and he said that God is the underground river that no one can dam up. And what I find that is so powerful is that if you're a believing skeptic and you're like, yeah, that's a well and it's going down and there's water there, so obviously it's not just what's in the bucket, then you're like, yeah, congratulations, you've had a good question. 10 seconds. Crap. Give me 30 extra. But he's really enjoying that too. But if you go down deep to the underground river, then you realize that in your skepticism and in your belief, it creates the conditions you can reach into wisdom that you've inherited and do so and bring it up to the world you begin in. But if your hubris insists that there's nothing behind you that you have to gain from, except what you can find on the surface, then you're missing the point. And so a good question and a good commitment to the mystery means you can benefit from all sorts of traditions. And if you're going to pick one, Tripp personally is down for the one where the homeless dead Jew says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Because my post-structuralist, nihilistic intuitions said, if something was going to be beautiful, it would be that. And I promise that as someone who's thought that way of being was something worth investing in is continue to be beautiful. So clearly you should hang out with Tim and read that book and drink next week.
Yeah.
So there you go. 2 minutes, that's ridiculous. You can't ask a Baptist from the South to do anything in 2 minutes.
That's true.